Patrick Johnston, here we are. Start of first video of the new Canucks season. What a start, huh? Where do we start? Where do we start? There's so much to talk about.
I think you stick a little bit just on the problems that we're seeing. I mean, it's a team that obviously turned over its defense. It already had, I think, let's be fair, last year, the defense was better than the year before, but it still wasn't great. New goalie, neither goalie really taking the bull by the horns. Certainly the absence of Jacob Markstrom is so obvious. And then I think just the sort of lack of rhythm we're seeing from Elias Pettersson, which is, I think some of that's all tied together because there's no preseason. I mean, there's just so many factors. But at the end of the day, this is a team that is giving up a lot of goals, and it is really hard to outscore your problems. And we can't forget that they were a bubble team before everything stopped last season. So it is a little bit all things maybe we expected, but it is so striking to actually see it all happening and in the worst way possible.
Canucks making strides the last couple of years. Obviously the fans were excited and you get to the playoffs, but I did keep reading from people like yourself, like Jason Botchford a couple of seasons ago, that Markstrom was really covering up a lot of the deficiencies on the team. This isn't to blame the goaltenders, because I don't know that we've, to reference again our dear friend Jason, I don't know that we've seen a lot of McSofties so far this year. But certainly when you look at the number of goals they've given up, is that decision to let Jacob Markstrom walk hurting them now?
Yes, I think so. The simple fact is Jacob Markstrom was in the Vezina conversation last year. Braden Holtby was once a Vezina contender, but he's moved on from that goalie. He is changing to a new goalie coach. There's a chance that he could find his old form. And let's be fair, Jacob Markstrom is now on the wrong side of 30 and could very well break down. But at the end of the day, this was a huge part of their story, especially last year. That the reason they were in the mix was because they had a really good goalie. They had a goalie who never gave up those so-called McSofties and stole games. Like, there were games where he was amazing. You think back to Sedin night, and I think it was 49 saves last February, a game the Canucks were really starting to hit the wall. The beginning of it, they were in the middle of, or I guess the early days of what essentially was a 6-week run to close the season. We didn't realize it was close the season, but a 6-week run where they only won 5 games. They won 5 of 15 games or something like that. And one of those wins was that Sedin night win against the Blackhawks, where Markstrom basically stood on his head. And that, more than anything, is not something we've seen. That Demko and Holtby have been fine. I have general sympathy for everybody involved right now because they haven't had a preseason. They're having to find their legs. The Canucks have played the most games of any team in the NHL in the opening week and a half of the season. But the fact is that they haven't had a scene-stealing performance from either of their goalies yet, and they sure could have used one. Thursday night they could have used one in Calgary. They could have used one. They won one game in Edmonton, I guess. But there's a couple games there where they really could have used a big performance. I think it's fair to say, and they didn't get one.
It's funny. There are going to be I hear the no preseason, no exhibition games, and I know every player is different, but every team is in that boat. So I find it a little weak to when people using that as an excuse. However, there's going to be all sorts of vagaries to the season this year. It's not normal. We know this. But, I was talking to you earlier, Canucks not practicing the day after a big loss, and they have another game coming up against the same team. Like, how much is this going to hurt, not just the Canucks, but any team that's in a position where they need to work through some issues?
Well, you contrast them with the Calgary Flames. I mean, it's hard not to do that with the personnel this season, but the Flames have basically played half the number of games the Canucks have, and that matters. I mean, it really does. Canucks don't want to make excuses, and you can understand that, but the practical reality is that they've played 6 games and, have had, since the season started, I think 2 practices off the top of my head. They practiced 2 full practices. They practiced last Sunday. And then I guess they actually, maybe it's only 1 now that I think about it, but it's tough because they're playing so many games. They need rest. Rest and recovery is so important, especially when you're playing back-to-backs. Now, the Canucks only have 4 more back-to-backs this season, which is the fewest of any team in the NHL. So, in the long run, that may help. But right now, a lot of the things they're trying to improve, Travis Green admitted it after Thursday's game. He said, listen, we're not able to do actual on ice. Here's what we need to do. Here's our system. And, when you're integrating as many young defensemen or new defensemen, Nate Schmidt and Travis Hamonic, in that group, just understanding what your teammates are doing and just getting the reps. Obviously, in the game matters the most because that's the live action, and you just can't replicate that as much as you want to try in a practice. You're just not getting those moments to set all that up. I mean, you're a soccer coach, you know how important it is getting your kids, a sense of what they're trying to figure out, what they want to be, what your team's trying to do based on the talents you have.
Especially 3 meters apart.
Well, that too, right? But
which by the way, that's the way the Canucks defense is playing right now too.
Yeah, they've been taking that social distancing to heart. But the truth is that with a team like this, where it's so important that they have the puck. I mean, that is their system. Is that they're a team that wants to have the puck, and that's how they're not going to end up playing defense. It's hard to get that going. And right now we're seeing a lot of cracks because of that, and their defense is a mess. I mean, I don't think anybody can ignore that.
That's a great segue because I don't want to go full on sports radio on this. Brought to you by the House of Negativity or the House of Positivity, or whichever side come to the dark side, Luke. But what concerns you more? The lack of depth on defense. The slow start by their so-called elite skill players, the goaltending, the special teams, or other. Which do you think is their biggest problem right now?
I think realistically it's the defense. I think that ties everything together. The fact that they signed Travis Hamonic on the eve of the season, and now we see he's out injured. How narrow their margin for error was to even begin with. Jalen Chatfield's been fine, and maybe he'll turn out to be a nice, handy Troy Stecher replacement. That's certainly, I think, what Jim Benning is hoping for, and certainly essentially what he said to me in the offseason. But, he got hurt, so now he's maybe not playing. Brogan Rafferty, I think everyone's seen already, he's really just got to get up to speed, and they're going to know really quick whether he can do it. Jack Rathbone, if he plays, is a similar kind of question. Alex Edler, losing Alex Edler, not good. But you want to have somebody in reserve, and Hamonic was supposed to be that. And if you lose both of them, all of a sudden you're really getting into what's underneath. And now we're finding out. I mean, this has been something that others have pointed out, but really, since Jim Benning came in, they've had one defenseman that's turned one defenseman they drafted and developed that's turned into a regular, and that's Quinn Hughes. There have been a few other guys that have played games, but we're now in that frame where they really need the guys that are on, sort of on the verge of taking that step potentially. The Rathbones, the Raffertys, the Chatfields. They need to see what those guys are actually going to do, and it's a big gamble.
How fair is that even for a young player when, let's not forget, lack of preseason for anyone. A lot of these guys have not played a competitive hockey game since last spring, 8, 9, 10 months. That's very difficult for even a seasoned pro to step in with that much lack of game time.
And that's partly why I am still trying. Obviously things look bad and things are bad. But there is a bit of element of needing to take a deep breath for let's see where we're at next week. The trend certainly is not good, but if things are really not good in a week's time, then I think we can really start really getting in on this, because the reality is
the town.
Well, that's it. You've got a couple.
You have to be aiming to beat to get to the playoffs, right? You got to say we're better than Winnipeg and Ottawa, and we can sort ourselves out in the spring.
Exactly, and that's you've had the hardest start to season that you can imagine. It's not gone well, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. And the truth is, even if you say Montreal, Toronto, even Calgary are the sort of top of the heap, it's a race for fourth place, and you're up against the Jets, you're up against the Oilers, and both those teams aren't not that well built, and have challenges of their own, and it becomes a bit of a, I mean, a three-way race isn't an ideal thing, but it is kind of where you're at. But yeah, you got to sit back. I mean, if things go badly against Ottawa next week, then yeah, things are, then they're really in a spot, I think. I mean, listen, I'm not trying to suggest that being 2-4 right now is a good place to be. It's not, but the context matters, I think. And so there is still a moment or two to take a deep breath. We'll see where we're at, even Sunday after they play the Habs on Saturday.
Absolutely, Patrick. Look, I, for one, have enjoyed watching these crazy games where the coaches haven't been able to sink their subversive systems into the players so much.
Yeah.
The scrambly hockey, particularly the 5-5 shootout game, was great. Although, I could do without the shootout. The 3-on-3 was wildly entertaining.
That was great. That was
great stuff, yeah. Patrick. We will endeavor to do these a couple times a week. Thanks for this interesting start to the season, and hopefully results are better when we talk next time.
See you next week.